Hello, I won't say good morning, I won't say good afternoon, I won't say good evening because I don't know what part of the world you are at and what time it is. But I'm very happy and honoured to be speaking to the Global Forum for Teacher Educators. And thanks to Dr. Munir Musa for inviting me and for putting this whole thing together. Now, my name's John Rowe, and I tell stories. And I've been telling stories for probably, quite a number of years, a few decades, all over the world. And when I was asked to do this session, I thought about it and I thought, well, there aren't any rules. Every country is different. Every country's approach to storytelling is different. But there is a commonality about stories. There are common themes. So I'm going to start with a quote because people worry about whether they're telling a story properly. And I'll start with a quote from a great storytelling friend of mine, Taffy Thomas. And he says, "The only harm you can do to a story is not to tell it." So, and I think that's quite an important thing for children to know as well, because children always compare themselves to other people and think, and adults do, we all do. I listen to other storytellers and I think, my goodness gracious me, I'm not nearly as good as that. And I think it's natural human thing. But with children, it's much more important because it wrecks their confidence. So the first thing is for them, I think it's praise. Whatever they do is praise them for it, because if even just to open your mouth and tell a story requires an enormous confidence. So I'm looking at all these countries on the side. It's fantastic. Nigeria, Taiwan, Pakistan, loads from Romania. I love Romania. I've got a house in Romania. And Philippines, all over. Fantastic. I feel like I'm talking to the world. And in fact, that's what we've been doing through lockdown. We've been talking to the world through story. So I thought I'd start with an approach I use to small children. I think especially when I'm working in countries where English might not be the first language, and some teachers like to use storytelling as a fun way of helping them build English as an additional language. So whether it's first language or second or third language, I like children to shout out, because children like nothing more than shouting out all together. I mean, they're a bit shy about sometimes doing it by themselves, but they're in a group. A good shout is good. So I use with young children, I use stories with repeated lines and repeated words. Sometimes I use actions where I get them to put their hands in the air or bang their knees in rhythm. But I'm going to start with, I think I'll just do a story to start off with. And wherever you are, shout the repeated lines out and the repeated words. Don't be embarrassed. Wake up the neighbors. And this is a story. Versions of this story appear everywhere in the world, which is why I've chosen this story. And I know some people like to have stories with morals, so I've chosen one. And some children like stories to have a moral or a lesson. So I've chosen a universal one. And it's about an old woman. Long ago, when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger, and all my teeth were my own, there was an old woman, and she lived in a vinegar bottle. One day, flying overhead was a fairy, And this is what the fairy heard. Woe is me, which means I'm very sad. Woe is me. An old woman such as me shouldn't live in a vinegar bottle. She should live in a fine cottage out in the countryside, and she should have a thatched roof, maybe roses growing around the front door. And the fairy said, very well, before you get into bed tonight, turn round 3 times, and in the morning we shall see what we shall see. And the old woman didn't even say thank you. She just ran to her bed. Well, she ran as fast as she could in a vinegar bottle. She turned round 3 times. And if you're with children, you say, how many times did she turn round? And they go, 3 times. And she got into bed. And when she woke up in the morning, she was in a fine cottage. It had a thatched roof. And there were roses growing round the door. And the fairy went all round the world and did all those things that fairies have to do. And after a year, she decided to see how the old woman was getting on. And her surprise, this is what she heard. Woe is me. Woe is me. An old woman such as me shouldn't live in the middle of nowhere like this. She should live in a fine townhouse with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. And there should be people singing and dancing on the streets outside. Very well. Before you get into bed tonight, turn around how many times? 3 times. And in the morning we shall see what we shall see. And the old woman didn't even say thank you. She just ran to her bed, turned round how many times? 3 times, got into bed and went to sleep. And when she woke up in the morning, she was in a fine townhouse. And there were chandeliers. And people singing and dancing on the streets outside. And the fairy went all round the world. And did all those things that fairies have to do. And after a year, she decided to see how the old woman was getting on. And her surprise, this is what she heard. Woe is me. Woe is me. An old woman such as me shouldn't live amongst all these ordinary people. She should live in a fine castle. And there should be servants bringing her breakfast in bed. And the queen should come to visit, and she should curtsy. That's like bowing to the queen. Very well, said the fairy. Before you get into bed tonight, turn round 3 times. And in the morning, we shall see what we shall see. And the old woman didn't even say thank you. She just ran to her bed, turned round 3 times, got into bed and went to sleep. And when she woke up in the morning, she was in a fine castle. And the servants bringing her breakfast in bed. And if I'm with children, I go around the room and I ask them what is their favourite food for breakfast. And that way we can get all the children to join in with the story. And ask them what they like to drink for breakfast. And when we have a huge plate full of food from the class, and then she went downstairs and there was the queen and she curtsied to the queen. Well, the fairy went all round the world and did all those things that fairies have to do. And after a year, she decided to see how the old woman was getting on, but to her surprise, but not yours, yours in the Philippines, yours in Romania, yours in Pakistan, yours in Serbia. No one all around the world, they're not surprised at all that this is what she heard. Woe is me. Woe is me. An old woman such as me shouldn't have to curtsy to the Queen. She should be the Queen. Very well, before you get into bed tonight, turn round 3 times. And in the morning we shall see what we shall see. And the old woman didn't even say thank you. She just got the servants to carry her up the stairs, spin around 3 times, and lift her into bed. And she went to sleep. And when she woke up in the morning, she was the Queen. And the fairy went all round the world and did all those things that fairies have to do. And after a year, she decided to see how the old woman was getting on. And to her surprise, but none of yours, this is what she heard. Woe is me. Woe is me, an old woman such as me shouldn't be queen of a tiny little country like this. She should be queen of the whole world. Very well. Before you get into bed tonight, turn round 3 times. And in the morning we shall see what we shall see. And the old woman didn't even say thank you. She just got the servants to carry her up the stairs, spin around 3 times, lift her into bed and covered her with those silk sheets. And she went to sleep. And when she woke up in the morning, she was back in her vinegar bottle. And the children like that because there's a repetition, and you can ask them at the end which word she forgot to say. And of course, it's thank you, molto or whatever. So, and then it's about greed. So, that's probably a story I'd use with very well. If I'm doing it as an additional language, I might use it up to 7, 8-year-olds. Excuse me, just. I think one of the most important things about telling stories is to use your own voice. People think there's a certain way of telling stories, or people are embarrassed about their voice. I think it's very important not to be. There was a great jazz musician called Miles Davis. And one of his phrases was, sometimes it takes a long time to play like yourself. And I think it's really important to be yourself when you're telling stories. And let children know it's okay to be themselves and not to be embarrassed about how they speak. And I don't think there's any one way of telling. Some people like to use puppets. I can't because I get in a mess and they'd be all over the place and I'd use the puppets at the wrong time. Some people like to dress up. I like to dress up because I do a lot of work, open air, and to go into schools. Gone into schools, hundreds of schools all around the world. And but if I'm open, I've just been working a festival this last 3 days, and I had whole families listening to me, and while I had my stick and my hat and my tailcoat, they knew I was an entertainer. So When I stood on the stage, they came and listened. And I think anything that opens the door and lets people listening is good. Other people say that dressing up gets in and using props gets in the way of the story. And they like to bring people to them and let the story unfold slowly. And that's good as well. There are so many different ways of telling. I've been curating the World Storytelling Cafe throughout lockdown. And so we have tellers from all over the world. And I'm always amazed by how many different techniques there are used for telling stories. And how many of the same stories reappear all over the world. Cinderella, for instance. As far as I know, there's over 300 different versions of Cinderella. I think every country has its own version of Cinderella. One of the earliest Cinderella stories came from ancient China, from 300 AD. And no, 600 AD, I think. But there's an even earlier one from ancient Egypt, from 36 BC, as far as we know. I find that extraordinary, and I think this was reinforced to me when I was telling a Rom version, a gypsy version of Cinderella called Mossy Coat, and that was collected in 1915 from an English gypsy. And I'd been telling this story for years, and I was in a classroom in Derby in England, and there were most of the class there was from Bangladesh, and they were all wearing their own clothes. There was no school uniform, and I looked out and I suddenly realized that all the clothes in the story I was telling, I mean, there was a dress of silk, color of the birds of the sky. There was a dress of satin, got white satin, gold leaves on it the size of a man's hand. And all the clothes in the story were in that classroom. And I realized that that was kind of the persistence of story. That the Rom had left the northern Indian subcontinent about 600 AD or something like that. And they'd walked, and they'd walked, and they'd walked. And after about 100 years, they might have sat down in Turkey around a fire and shared stories. Another 100 years. They might have sat down in France and shared stories. And eventually, after 1,000-year walk, they came to England and shared that story. But little things had stayed, like the clothes. And I think because those stories have been traveling through time, is one of the reasons stories are so important. Because the more stories we listen to and we share from other countries, the more children realize that there is more that binds us together than divides us. And I think in the world today, that's really important. So I'm looking at the time. I'm a storyteller. I can rattle on forever. So I'm just looking. I'm just looking down the side. That's okay. There's no questions yet. Nothing that I have to comment on. I think I'll do. If any of you work with older children, sometimes they think stories aren't for them. But a very useful one I found, say, for 14-year-olds, which are probably the most difficult age group to work with. I think how I sometimes introduce stories to them is to use dilemma stories. Dilemma stories where, and they're quite harsh, and they were used in traditional societies, mainly through Africa, to like a debating society. So the storyteller would tell the story, and it would have several possible ends, and there was no right and no wrong, but people had to argue for the end they wanted. And at the end, after much argument and much discussion, the elder might judge who's got the best argument. And I think it's very useful for children because, so especially for 13, 14-year-olds, the world over, it's very difficult to get them to open their mouths and express an opinion. Some will do it, but usually in the classroom, it's the same 2 or 3 children that will speak. But a dilemma story might open a discussion. I'll give you an example. This is an African, I don't know whereabouts in Africa it's from, an African story. And there was a chief, and he had 3 sons, and he sent them out into the world. And the way things go, you like to bring back something from your parents. So the boys agree to split up in 3 directions, and they agree to meet back at the river in 5 years' time and show each other what they bought for Dad. And one bought they met in 5 years' time. One had a magnifying glass, and when you looked in it, you could see what was happening anywhere in the world. And one had bought a slipper as a gift for their father. And if you got on that slipper, it would instantly fly you to wherever you were going, wherever you wanted to go. And one had bought ointment. And whether you were alive or dead, all you had to do was spread that ointment on you or on someone. And if they were cut, the cut would be healed. If they were ill, their illness would be gone. If they were dead, they would be alive again. So I thought I'd test it. And I thought, well, it's quite a long way home. Let's see what's going on there. And they looked through the magnifying glass. They went right down, could see right into the village. Their father had died, and it was the day of the funeral, and he was going to be put on a funeral pyre. So they instantly, all 3 of them, held each other tight and leapt on the slipper and flew back to the village. And when they got there, the youngest got the ointment and spread it all over their father's body. And there he was, alive again. Now I ask you, or I'd ask the class, who brought the most useful gift? And if you're lucky, you can get the discussion going on 5, 10 minutes, quarter of an hour. I usually just get them to vote at the end for which way and see who changes their mind. There's lots of stories like that. And then once you've got them into the story, you can tell the more complex wonder tales. And they'll say, is that true? And I usually tell them about golden fleeces at this point. I tell a Serbian story called The Golden Ram. And I say, how many of you believe in golden sheepskins? Or who thinks that's a lot of nonsense invented by a storyteller? And usually a few brave souls will put their hands up saying they believe, and they believe that golden sheepskin exists. The golden sheepskin exists. And then the rest will say, oh no, it's a bunch of nonsense. So I tell them about when Jason and the Argonauts were sailing around the Mediterranean, and they ended up in Georgia. And in Georgia, they used to get wooden frames and fill them full of sheep's fleeces and put them in the river, pounding for gold. And they'd take them out at the end of the day. They'd put the sheep's fleeces along the riverbank. And on a good day, they'd pick out pieces of gold. And on a really good day, the center fleece would be covered in a fine gold dust. Now, you imagine Jason and the Argonauts, bunch of roughneck sailors, rolling down the riverbank. Whoa! Golden fleece! They're all sitting back in Greece, having a cup of coffee. You never guess what we saw in Georgia. Golden fleece. Everyone's running around town saying, you never guess what Jason saw in Georgia. Golden fleece. Well, there's some writer like me sitting up the top of the mountain with writer's block. Thinks, hears that and thinks, I'll use that. And he put it in a story. So you never know where fact finishes and fiction begins. And I think especially with children, that are very literal these days, it's kind of good to get them to use their imaginations and blur the edges of reality on occasion. Now, I've been rattling on, I'm talking away for about half an hour. If there's any questions, could you put them in the chat? Or would you like me to tell another story? I've got a hello from Romania. I love Romania. I have a house in Kolibița up near Bistrița. Well, yeah, I've got, can we use pictures? That goes back to what I was saying. There's nothing you can't do. I sometimes when I'm doing storytelling, especially in Vienna, I did a lot of work in kindergartens because they start teaching English at 3 years old in Vienna, and I had a whiteboard, a white chart next to me, and I was drawing pictures as I was telling, sort of picture cows and animals and whatever came into the story. You can, if you think pictures will enhance the story, use them. I think anything that you feel comfortable with. If you feel awkward using pictures, don't use pictures. If you feel natural using pictures, use pictures. Oh, well, here we go. Can we use storytelling method on maths and social studies? I think storytelling crosses over into all areas. You can, for maths, for the concept of distance, how many stories have a quest in, and you can get them to walk for so long, and or counting. I sometimes in the middle of a story with young children get them to count. With older children, we talk about distance. Social studies, you can use it. I mean, social studies is you could tell a traditional story and talk about how attitudes change. I mean, in most stories, the at the time when a lot of stories were done, certainly in England and Britain and over a lot of Europe, because stories were told generally by poor people. So the girls went into service, worked as servants, and boys went and worked on the farm. So there were definite gender roles, but you can actually use a story and talk about how things have changed, and you can explore change with that. You can explore, especially change the role of women. I try and find stories these days with strong women in, because the whole idea of princesses sitting around waiting for princes on white horses to save them, one, is outdated, and two, in the world pantheon of stories, there are remarkably few princes on white horses saving maidens. If you look at the traditional stories, it's usually if a girl is in trouble, or a boy, they bump into an old woman in the woods, and however how they treat the old woman is generally how well they come out at the end of the story. Or a boy will be, or meet someone in the middle, will be in trouble, and over again, and they'll and eventually they take advice, and it could be advice from a man, it could be advice from a woman, but when they take the advice, and I think there is an important lesson there, in so much, and stories can teach that, because in a lot of us, certainly in countries where a very intense education system, people think if they fail early, they'll fail forever. Or if they get in trouble, if they get in trouble early, they get kicked out of school, they're in trouble forever, and their life is over. And in fact, in all the stories, all the heroes of stories have been in trouble over and over again. And so there's enormous life lessons in stories. Important to catch children's interest during a story session. Can I share some of the key points for kindergarten teachers? Make the story short, and I use a Native American story, and it's about a frog. I won't do the whole story, but in it is and he banged, but they can make noise. So, and I say, and he banged his drum, and I get them banging their kneecaps like this, and he shook his rattle, and he blew his whistle. And that happens over and over in the story, and children love doing it. And it's a way they can join, even if they're non-verbal. If they're not speaking, they can do that. And I get them to do actions, but you can't see on the screen. Let me just do one arm, and I'll just suggest that I've got both of them. And he got his cousin the red hawk to take something somewhere, and he flew higher and higher and higher and higher. And I get all the children making those actions. And whenever there's an opportunity, especially with young children, to get them get them to shout out. And that goes into another question that's come out. How does the teller avoid the audience feeling bored while listening to the story? I think it's recognizing them. It's eye contact. It's sometimes because story is not a script, you can deviate a little from the story, and you can so you can address a member of the audience or something, and it's a bit like a comedian works. If someone in the audience has a mobile phone that goes off, a comedian won't pretend it hasn't gone off. They'll use that as part. And so I think the more the audience feels you're not talking at them, which is kind of really difficult while I'm on StreamYard, because I can't see any of your faces. But the more the audience feels you're not talking at them but talking to them, and that they can communicate back, even if it's just by facial expressions, you can keep their attention. Yeah, I think lots of gestures and facial expression will help grab the eye contact. Absolutely right. How can I involve my primary school students in creating stories? Oh, we've got a few. I'll probably finish on this one. Maybe we've got a few more minutes. I think creating stories, it's there's some really easy techniques that and you start with very simple questions. You can build them. You can get them building in class, as a whole class, or in groups, and just ask them a question. Who's the main character? Where do they live? What do they live in? What do they live in is always fun, because you'll end up with really crazy stuff. And go with it. Whatever they say, go with it and work it into the story. And you retell the story as they're making it up, and then have something goes wrong, and use the rule of 3. A lot of stories, if you think about it, things go wrong about 3 times, and eventually after 3 times it comes right. So you might have someone living a perfect life and something goes wrong, and they try and put that right, and something goes wrong again. You can ask the children all about that. So so that's and you can build or have them want to find something, what's their heart's desire, and have them take that journey to find their heart's desire, but have a villain in the story that's stopping them the whole time. Is narrating a poem in story form like the idea? Loads of stories were told in poem forms, in great ballads. That was one way people use them. I've got an interesting question here on special needs. How can I involve my special needs students in telling stories and make them storytellers, not only me? I'd use multiple senses, and if I can take an example of 2 conditions. People on the extreme autistic spectrum, these are generalizations, but like archetypal images, and they'll make them, and they can use, I mean, these days, an electronic pad or Makaton, just or so if you had a witch in the story, it would be, I only learned this because I did storytelling with special needs, and this is what the kids taught me. Which is this, and then on the other end of and so that so some of the people on the autistic spectrum were really happy with very quite making rigid patterns. And on the other end, I had people with Down syndrome who loved improvising. So you leave a gap. I always, if we're making up a story, well, one, we'd act it out, and two, but I'd always put a meal scene, a feast in there, because then my Down syndrome's people, and I think just use what they have. So multiple senses. I think I'm out of time. The good doctor has flashed my image up there. So I want to thank you all. If people want to get hold of me, I can answer questions. That's john@johnrowe.com. Then I'll answer any questions you want. I'll just put that in the chat if I can. No, I can't. So, in what particular part lesson is storytelling applicable? Any part of the lesson is storytelling applicable. Obviously, I'd say that in the storytelling. Well, thank you very much. If any of you are storytellers yourself, come to the worldstorytellingcafe.com. If you have young children and they want to practice, on Tuesdays we do a session for under 18s, 18 under. Meanwhile, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Dr. Munir Musa, for inviting me.